Today's interview is with Tom DeCorte, an ESPN coordinating producer and graduate of Xavier University.
As you know, my producers has that Xavier pride. We've always got you guys front and center anytime you're playing.
He helped Scott Van Pelt start his Midnight SportsCenter show a few years ago, and he recently moved over to help Stephen A. Smith produce his NBA coverage, as well as SportsCenter at Night from LA. Tom has been with ESPN for over 20 years, so he has a ton of great stories for you all to hear. But one of my personal favorites is talking about the SportsCenter Top 10. It's ingrained in our culture, and he takes us through step by step how they produce it every night. You can check the description down below for timestamps of our topics, and be sure to subscribe to my channel for more segments and interviews coming soon. If you have someone you want me to talk to, feel free to reach out and let me know. And now enjoy this interview with ESPN coordinating producer Tom DeCorte. Tom, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon and taking some time to talk about how everything's going right now.
Happy to do it. Good to see you.
Great to see you. So first of all, I want to ask you how you are working with SportsCenter and ESPN and how you guys are all managing content right now and trying to plan everything going on behind the scenes.
It's really difficult. I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a trying time. I mean, it's a trying time for everybody. So we're just trying to use this to do as much content as we can. I mean, obviously we have the NFL draft coming up next week. That's a huge event for us. It always is, but even more so now that we, have a very limited number of events. Obviously we have The Last Dance, the documentary on Jordan. We expect that to be a big ratings win for us, hopefully. And and it's going to be a great movie. I mean, I think people are really going to enjoy watching it, going back in time to, people love Michael Jordan still. It's amazing, 20 years since he last played a basketball game. He still resonates with everybody, all sports fans.
So you've worked a lot with guys like Scott Van Pelt. You were his producer in getting his show started when he went solo. You work a lot with Stephen A. Smith, and now with this quarantine going on, you're transitioning to the SportsCenter back with no NBA and Stephen A.'s not having a show right now with the NBA. You're working at SportsCenter at Night. What is it like working with all of those guys and personalities and planning their shows before then? What we all see is the viewer on the screen, but you're behind the scenes and you're the ones talking them through everything.
Yeah, so it's a lot different now than it is when the games are going on. When the games are going on, you're just reading and reacting to what's happening that night. Now we're in a really totally different mode as far as, we really have to plan each day. All right, what are we going to do today? A lot of it is based on, historic stuff, like, hey, what's happened this day in history? Whose birthday is it today? Can we build something around that? We're also really leaning in on all of our contacts, right? So all the contacts we've made throughout our years in our careers are, hey, for example, like I was working on a show a couple weeks ago with Kenny Mayne, and I'm like, Kenny, what do you got today? I'm like, who can we call today? And he's like, hey, Dale Jr. is in this, e-race. I'll call him up. Maybe he can come and talk about the race. And then, he did 7 minutes with us, and it was great. We had an amazing interview. So, that's where we are right now. It's about, using all the contacts and friendships and relationships you made throughout the years to try to, manage the content day to day. And, we're all just kind of trying to do the best we can until hopefully sports comes back soon.
When sports are happening and you have a typical day at the office, and everybody that works in sports always says there's no typical day. You come in and everything's different. But as normal as a day can be when you're working with Scott or with Stephen A., what is a day like for you as a producer for them?
Well, one thing is you start thinking and you think about the show from the minute you wake up until the minute the show's over. And then as soon as the show's over, you're thinking about the next one. So I would say there are typical, like every day to me is very similar because I get I feel like consistency and repetition helps build quality. But within that consistency, things that you aren't expecting always happen. So because you have the structure of this is everybody knows exactly what their role is, when you get the expected unexpected, then you know, okay, this person's going to do this person's going to do that, Stephen A is going to write this, and we have a system in place that allows us to succeed. We're not chasing it, right?
Yeah.
So my job is to basically just kind of organize everybody so that everyone feels comfortable and knows the plan going in, right? And then when things happen that change the plan, everybody can adjust at the same time. And we're not having to make 8 different emails or phone calls or whatever. You just change it and everybody knows, okay, we're doing this now. So essentially my role is dual fold. Like I work with whoever the host of the show is to, craft and design the show in the way that both of us are envisioning it. And then my other job is to organize the rest of the staff to make sure that that they know what the vision is and that their contributions and their ideas get shared with whether it's Stephen A. or Van Pelt or Kenny or Butch Gross or John Anderson, whoever it is, that there's that collaboration there. Because the best ideas generally, the best ideas generally come from either the host or the show staff. The show staff, we have amazingly talented people on our show staff that come up that are constantly thinking of excellent ideas. So we just, we really lean on them. Those men and women do a great job.
Yeah. What's Stephen A. like when he goes on the air? How much of what he does, I mean, he's such a character. How much of what he does is scripted is maybe too strict to say, but planned versus him just reacting to what somebody's saying?
Well, I think I don't work on first take with him, so I don't want to speak for what their process is. I work with him he's more of a host in the NBA show that I work with him on, the pregame show. So our show is very scripted in the sense of we have the topics that we know we're going to do each show, but we try to give him room so that within some of the conversations that he's having with the analysts or the reporters or the interview subjects, we try to give him room so that he can be Stephen A., right? So you don't want Stephen A. to be anything other than himself. And that goes for whoever's hosting a show. Like the host, they're the one that's presenting the show. So if you're not producing with them in mind, then you're asking for trouble.
A few years ago when Scott Van Pelt started his own show, he takes SportsCenter, he takes the Midnight SportsCenter, and he's doing it on his own. And you were his lead producer for that, right?
Yep.
And he comes to you. Does he come to you and pitch this, or is this a SportsCenter thing in general that they say, hey, we want to revamp this, and they put you guys on a team? Or how does that show all come together and pay off like it has over the last few years?
So the idea for that show started at the Masters when when we go to the Masters, we don't stay in hotels. We stay in like rental homes, like Airbnbs. So Scott was staying with one of our executives, Mike McQuaid and Andy North, and I think Tarico in a house, right? So Scott's talking with Mike McQuaid, who's a legendary producer and executive at ESPN. And they were basically talking about like what SportsCenter, like what the evolution of SportsCenter could look like. And Mike was like, well, what if you had your own show where we just did all this stuff? And Scott's like, oh, that's crazy. And he's like, is it? And so like that was like kind of where the seed of the idea came to be. And then when Mike happened to take over SportsCenter like a year or two later, and, so he was like, hey, let's do this. So then it was at that point where Scott approached me and said, hey, what do you think about this idea? And I said, oh, well, like, what if we did X, Y, and Z? And like in that first conversation, when we were talking about what a Scott Van Pelt Sports Center could be, there are two of the staples of the show, Bad Beats and Where in the World is Scott Van Pelt, were both segments that we conceived in that conversation.
Really?
So from there, he's like, all right, well, he's like, if this happens, is this something you want to do? And I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that. And, I left that conversation. I'm like, well, if that happens, great, but it probably never happened. And then 2 months later, I got the call from him and Mike, and they were like, hey, like, this is going to happen. We want you to be a part of it. And it just kind of took off from there.
And where does Stanford Steve enter the picture?
That was a thing where Scott was like, hey, I really think that, he can be a part of the show. I would definitely want him to be part of the group. I don't think we necessarily knew right away that there was going to be an on-air role. That was something that when we were in development for the show, we kind of like, Scott's like, hey, can we try this out? And I'm like, sure. Like in the developmental stage, everything's on the table, right? So we tried it out and we're like, oh, this could really work. People just really like him, and he's a very likable and relatable person.
Yeah.
And it just kind of worked. And we're like, all right, well, this is a thing and we're going to do it. And there was definitely, some people that were like, I don't think this is a good idea. And then there were some people that are like, oh yeah, that'll work. And, like we were told, like, do the show you want to do. So we kind of took that to heart. And, that was one of those decisions that worked out.
How much fun is it for you to look at this from a big scale and work your way up to SportsCenter? And I look at this sometimes and working with people at Xavier and working with, and talking to people and big names through my time at Xavier and college basketball. And it's very relative when I say big names. I'm talking about people or players that I've talked to that maybe I watched on TV when I was younger that you encounter along the way. But you're there at the top. You are at the mothership. You're at SportsCenter. You're a producer for that show that everybody's watched and grown up on. How cool is that for you to see where you've come, from Xavier now to where you are working at the top, and to see all that as a whole working there?
Well, I mean, listen, I got very lucky. I got my job at ESPN because of a person I went to Xavier with who's not even in the sports media business anymore. So I got a foot in the door, and then, there were a series of very fortunate events that helped me move up throughout the company. But really, like now, I don't really define success as whatever show I'm working on, even though that is tremendously important. Now I'm very lucky to be in a position where I'm helping, people that are entering the business, and I'm, identifying the next wave of producers and talent. And that's where I get my biggest reward these days, is to see, like, wow, this guy can really produce, or this guy can really cut a good feature, and seeing them, giving them chances, helping them grow. And hopefully that they take my role someday and elevate it even higher. There is no ceiling for ESPN or for any show. It's just like, if you're not growing, then you're going down. Like, you have to constantly be evolving in this business. And, I think the current situation we're in, I think, is going to provide a lot of opportunity for evolution and development and different ways of consuming media, different ways of presenting media. You're already seeing it throughout the landscape. So I think, like, this is going to be a big opportunity for ESPN and for a lot of companies to really think about how they're doing things and where the viewers are, what viewers want. It's a really interesting time.
How do you see it evolving, Tom, when you have Twitter and all these other platforms where now you can get highlights in 2 to 3 minutes instead of when I was growing up and you had to watch highlights or SportsCenter for an hour just to see, the clip of the game that you wanted to watch. How do you see SportsCenter adapting and evolving to that?
Well, so if you just want to find out what happened in the game, then Twitter or digital highlights might be enough for you. But if you want a deeper understanding of what's happening or a more entertaining look at what's happening, SportsCenter is still providing that for you. Nobody does highlights better than SportsCenter. And the level of detail and sophistication that our highlight group provides is second to none. And it's a super inspiring group to be associated with because of how they're able to take a game or an event and elevate it to a level you just like that's super entertaining or super informative. It's really awesome. It's a great collaborative group to be a part of. But that being said, you go where the viewers are. And I think, we've seen that the linear model seems to be, is getting older. Young people are going to different platforms to get their material. And, you've seen it with SportsCenter on Snapchat. That's been a real plus for us as a company. You're seeing us do a lot more on YouTube, on Instagram Live. There's a lot of different, Quibi now, we've just launched a show. So I think we're starting to, really figure out, okay, where, the traditional hour SportsCenter format, all right, that still works on linear TV, but, there's different ways to use the SportsCenter brand as we move to different forms of media.
Yeah, and you talk about evolving like that, and this young wave of producers or on-air talent that's going to come up. What would you say is something that you look for in a young producer, or somebody that might be listening to this that wants to get into the business? What is something that you say, wow, that guy or that girl is going to be a great producer someday? What are you looking for?
It's really, to me, it's about three things. It's about critical thinking. How do you solve problems? Ideas. How do you conceive content? And professionalism and work ethic. How reliable and how hardworking are you? I can tell you, I never look at how well someone did at school, where someone went to school. That stuff is not as important to me. I'm just looking for someone who can solve problems, who can create solutions, who can come up with ideas that entertain and inform people. And that's really what I'm looking for. And it's just one of those things where, when I encounter someone for the first time, second time, third time, you just kind of oh, that person's got it. That woman's got it. She's outstanding. And you just I've been lucky over, my 20-year career at ESPN. I've been able to encounter a lot of those folks, and they've done incredible work for us.
Now, I'm curious to know, when the red light goes on and Scott Van Pelt is live for his Midnight SportsCenter and you're behind the scenes and you're punching all the buttons and everything, how many people are in that room and what's all happening behind the scenes as he does his show?
Well, there's only two people that are going to be talking to Scott during the show in his ear that aren't Stanford Steve or a guest, and that's the producer of the show, which used to be me, is now Marco Alfandari, who's done a fantastic job since I moved on to a different role, and then the director of the show, whoever that is, on a given night. So they're directing and producing Scott as the show goes around. But I mean, it takes a pretty good sized group to put the show on. You've got a director, you've got a technical director who switches the show, you've got assistant directors, assistant producers, researchers. I mean, all in all, it's probably about a 20-person group that puts on the show on a given night. And like I said, everybody's got their role, and early on, one of the things that the two things that we wanted to build was a show of young people who have great ideas and people who liked being around each other and wanted to be part of the team. And we were very lucky that original staff, when the show got started, is a really special group that was like, you never forget that first group, and then I was kind of the last person to move on. And like a lot of the originals are now either doing other things or have, moved up. And, Marco was a assistant producer when the show started, and now he's the producer of the show. And, it's great to see that, since that original group, we've all kind of grown and moved on to things that it was really special. It's probably the most special group that I've been a part of in my 20 years at ESPN.
I know that everything's not normal right now, and you're having to fill spots and fill roles and fill content. But if everything was normal, and you touched on it a little bit a few minutes ago, what is your job at ESPN as far as the shows that you work on? You a little bit with Stephen A. on his NBA show, but what else are you working on on a given day?
So I do. I'm the coordinating producer, which is like a different title, like kind of like an executive producer of SportsCenter from Los Angeles. So the 1 a.m. version with Stan Verrett and Neil Everett. So I work with that group on a night in, night out basis. And then I also, as you mentioned, work with Stephen A. on his NBA pregame show, which is on Wednesday nights when the season's going on. So those are the two primary things I work with, but I also I'm still, very much involved with other parts of SportsCenter, and those are my primary roles. And then within that, there's always a few things here and there that you end up picking up along the way. And then I'm also I have 7 direct reports, so being their manager and helping them with their career and developing them, that's also an important part of what I do. So that takes up a pretty, good chunk of time. And, I was really enjoying both roles before everything got shut down. But, we'll get back here at some point, and sports is going to come back, and it'll come back strong. But, for now, we got the pause button right now.
You produce that LA SportsCenter from Bristol, right?
So no, well, I mean, yes and no. So we can do it from Bristol, but we have an LA production center that's right across the street from Staples.
Okay.
So it's a fully operational broadcast center. So they do the whole show from there. And I sit in a small control room with one other person when the show's on. But I can communicate with everybody in Los Angeles from the control room in Bristol. So when everything is normal, I usually go to Los Angeles about once every 6 weeks and spend a week out there with the group, and that way I can be with them in person, which is always better. But it also, my role in Bristol provides them to have a connection with the different groups in Bristol. Like their highlights are all cut from Bristol and then sent via fiber to Los Angeles. So having a couple folks like myself and a production assistant and assistant producer in Bristol, that helps them connect with Bristol and make sure there's communication on both sides.
Gotcha. One very specific thing I've always been curious of: how does the top 10 get produced every night? Is that one person's job, or how does that happen? How does that come together?
It's different for different shows. For the 11 o'clock and the 1 a.m. versions, it's usually a 2-person operation with 1 or 2 people overseeing it. So there's like 2 production assistants, so folks, men and women your age, that are sitting there and they're cultivating all the plays. So everybody who's watching a game in the big screening room that we have you'll just hear it. It'll happen throughout the night, like yell out, top play, Pistons game, and like then the person comes over and gets the play. And then of course they're monitoring Twitter and hashtag SC Top 10, and then we get so many submissions every night from schools, and whether it's the G League or Kaiser Gates kind of became like a regular on Top 10 because I would get them from like my Xavier people who would send them to me, and then the G League people was sending them to me, and it felt like every week we were getting a play from Kaiser Gates. And finally, I actually got an email from someone from Xavier like, you must be like doing the top 10 every day because I keep seeing Kaiser Gates on top 10. I'm like, he is making some great plays, but yes, I would be lying if I didn't say like I was forwarding them along, But ultimately, for the 1 a.m. Sports Center, I go in and watch the top 10 with the group that produces the top 10 before the show starts. And I'm like, all right, what's number one right now? I only have 2 rules about the top 10. Number 1, better be the best play or the most memorable play of the night. And number 10, better be really interesting so that the viewer gets sucked into watching the top 10. 2 through 9, that's all you. But 1 and 10, I get to have a little bit of decision-making and final say about. But the overwhelming majority of the time, these guys and gals, they're on it. So, I don't usually have too much of a beef with what they're doing. They do an awesome job. But every once in a while, I'm like, hey, I know that play in the Miami Heat game was great, but, everyone is talking about this Zion dunk. So that's really got to be number 1 tonight,
Okay.
There's definitely – and sometimes it's just an amazing play. If you get an amazing play, I don't care where it is. I don't care if it's you've seen it. We've had, Pee Wee football as number 1. If it's an outstanding
that
number
bocce
1 play,
ball, I don't know if you remember that.
right.
Remember that
Oh,
bocce
yeah.
one where the guy
exactly.
split the – yeah.
That was the night I was working, and I'm like, this is the number 1 play. I get it. LeBron had an amazing dunk tonight, but, LeBron will have another amazing dunk. We might never get this play again. So I'm like, that's a number 1 play. It's a number 1, you're still talking about it. That's mission accomplished, right? You want people to have in their mind, all right, I saw this yesterday and it was great,
Yeah.
And top 10 is, listen, it's an institution, when I started ESPN, it was plays of the night, it wasn't even 10. And then it just kind of evolved oh yeah, let's just do a top 10. And because everybody loves a list, right?
Yeah.
And they just kind of took off from there.
Wow, that's great. I didn't realize that was, I guess, how it all came together, a team of people, and you sit there and go I guess it's all night. You just
– There are 2 people where they walk in the building at 5 o'clock at night, and their only thing they're doing that night is top 10. That's their job. They do the top 10. Yeah. So they come in at 5, and it airs at 11, and it airs at or 11:50 and 1:50. And that's what they do. That's their job for the night, top 10. Just there's going to be, if there was tonight, there would be NBA playoff games tonight if we were still doing sports. There'd be, there's people
hurts.
There'd be people walking in the door tonight where they'd be like, okay, these 2 people, you've got game 2 of the Lakers and the Grizzlies. That's your job for the night. You're cutting the highlights for Lakers Grizzlies. There'd be 2 other people that'd be like, you have Celtics Sixers, and then there'd be people that walk in, they got the Reds and Pirates, So all that stuff's getting watched by a person.
So when you cut highlights of every single game, especially when you get into months of April and May, when NHL playoffs, NBA playoffs, baseball's happening, football, you have the draft and stuff, so you don't have real games, but you still have some packages that you have to run. But you have to fit in, if you're talking about May, you have to fit in all the highlights of all the NBA, NHL, and MLB games as much as you can. Is that somebody sitting there, like you said, cutting those highlights, or is that outsourcing from MLB that they're cutting highlights
We
for
do them all.
SportsCenter is doing all of that and cutting it. Now,
We do them all.
Is that a 10-person job? Is that
well,
one?
Like I said, one person, one person's watching each game.
Interesting.
So, and then during basketball, college basketball season, then we kind of team it out, or during hockey season, we'll have like, okay, we have a 4-person team that's cutting hockey tonight. So like, and then you check in with the people and like, okay, what are the 3 best things or the 5 best things in hockey tonight? And then they tell you, and you're like, okay, it's like ordering off a menu. It's like, all right, I'll take a little Connor McDavid, I'll take the New York Rangers, and I'll take the, Arizona Coyotes highlight.
Yeah.
And then that's what you end up with. And, like the great thing about it is everybody's so invested and they're so passionate about the 1 or 2 things that they have that night. And you get great pitches, right? So you're like, hey, if I were running this highlight, I would do this, this, and this. And then the next person comes up and you're like, well, if I had my game, I would do this, this, and this. And then so ultimately what it ends up happening as a producer is, going in like, okay, all these NBA and NHL playoff games, those are all going to make it, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a question of how long do you want those highlights to be? How good were the games? And then there's always like 2 or 3 highlights that you're like, okay, I got room for 2 or 3 highlights and they could be anything in the sports world. And you're just listening to everybody come in with their pitches and their ideas. And then you're like, okay, these are the 3 best things that I've heard. This is what we're doing. These are the ones we're going to run. And then that way, and, part of it is, if you're producing for Van Pelt, you're going to go to Scott and you're going to say, okay, here are the 10 things that we could do. What are the 3 you like the most? And then he'll pick them, so that's kind of how it gets done. And then ultimately, there's always a couple of things that'll surprise you on a given night, things you weren't expecting, things that happen, worldwide or nationwide, or, you get, the best thing about the internet and social media is you get stuff from everywhere. Our best content providers are our viewers. They see stuff and they shoot stuff on their phone and they send it to us, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and when you have a guy like Van Pelt who's so eloquent and good on the air, are you scripting out what's happening in the highlight, or are you just saying Bryce Harper hits a home run and so-and-so hits a home run, and are you letting him just go with it and react to it live?
Yeah, so he gets a shot sheet that says, here are the plays.
Okay.
And then here's what made the score. So like it'll be like an example of how it would be written would be like top or bottom of the 5th, 2 men on for the Reds. Joey Votto hits a double to left center. Andrew McCutchen falls down, throws from his backside, hits the cutoff man, and they throw Eugenio Suarez out at the plate, and then so he's got all that information, and then he's going to be able to watch. He can look at the shot sheet, look at the monitor, and be able to read and react. So that's kind of how it happens. So you give them the basic info, and then they take it from there.
This team of people cutting highlights, is it like a rotational program of people that are cutting highlights of their favorite sport, and then the next time they come in, they do hockey? Or is it every night? Like, say I come in, I cut baseball tonight. Am I every night coming in and cutting baseball? Or is Tom DeCorte telling me, hey, yeah, you're going to come in tonight and cut baseball, but tomorrow let's have you learn hockey, and the next night do basketball?
Well, yeah, I mean, people do find their niches, that they end up excelling in. But yeah, we try to keep it, we try to, give people a different, something different every so often, because you're always, you don't want to get in a rut. But the producers are not the people that are in charge of assigning them. There's a leadership group in highlights. We call them highlight producers. And most of them are people that used to cut highlights, and now they're in charge of supervising the highlights. So they're basically kind of like highlight all-stars, right? So they're the guys who have been the best at it over the years, guys and gals that have been the best at it. So what they do is like the PAs will come to them and be like, here's what I'm thinking for tonight's game. And they'll be like, oh, it's a really good idea, but we could build on it and do this. And then they work together, and then they're the ones that, because they know the PAs the best, they're the ones that schedule, okay, Paul's going to do the Reds game tonight. Tom, you're going to do the Tigers game or whatever. And then there's like a document where everybody comes in and they look to see what your game is.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
And obviously, to a certain degree, it's a meritocracy, right? You're going to put your best people on the NBA playoffs and the NHL playoffs, and you're going to put your newer people on the Tigers game because the Tigers aren't very good right now.
Yeah. It sounds a little sad in your voice.
Hey, we're just coming off one of the greatest stretches of Tiger baseball in their franchise history. I can't be too bitter.
When you look at the stuff you're doing with SportsCenter and you look at some of these people that are coming up, I guess like myself, although I'm not necessarily in the SportsCenter world, I'm more in the play-by-play, but when you look at some of these people that are coming up and studio hosts, what would you say is the biggest thing that you look for or would give advice on to somebody that wants to be the next Scott Van Pelt or Kenny Mayne or John Anderson or whoever? What are you looking for? Because you're the one as a producer that has to then go and work with them.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just, don't try to be the next whatever. Just be you, and just develop your own way of doing it, your own style. And I would just say trust that, that you have a vision for what you want to do and go do it. Don't try to be the next person, just be the first Paul. And, I think it's the biggest thing is just be willing to accept feedback and be willing to accept the fact that you're not going to be perfect right away, and really self-evaluate your own opportunities. Go back and watch the games that you've broadcast, go back and watch the pieces that you've written, and really evaluate, okay, what am I doing well? What do I need to get better at? And that's how you improve ultimately. I mean, I can tell you right now, one day every week while we're in the quarantine, my producer for the SportsCenter in Los Angeles and we spend 1 to 2 hours discussing old shows and how are we going to do better when we get back to sports again. We spent 2 weeks thinking about Saturday college football, and then we spent the last week on post-game NBA. How can we we looked at some shows all right, here's what we're doing well, here's what we're terrible at. How do we get better here? We really need to learn how to get better here. Do we have the right people in the right place? Do we need to rethink our staff? Do we need more somewhere else and less in a different place? This is the type of thing that self-evaluation is critical into improvement, whether you're just starting out in this business or whether you're at the top of your game. If you're not improving and you're not self-evaluating, you're never going to get better.
All right, a couple more questions here before we wrap up. What's your favorite event that you've worked through at ESPN through all that you've been there 20 plus years now, right?
Maybe 20 years. It was 20 years in March. Actually, my 20-year anniversary at the company was March 13th, which you'll remember was the first day of no sports.
Yeah, Friday the 13th.
Talk about the ultimate irony.
Well, happy anniversary.
Thank you very much. I'm
I'm
going to give you a top three.
I was going to say top three.
How about a top three? Patriots Rams Super Bowl, January, or was it either January or earlier February 2002.
What was your role with these events too?
I was a production assistant, and I got to cut. I edited the first half highlight of that Super Bowl, and I got to be at the Super Bowl. That was an amazing experience. Tiger Woods Masters last year. That was an incredible moment to be part of. And then the best moment I was ever in the building for was the Ray Allen shot, Heat Spurs NBA Finals Game 6. That was just an absolutely incredible sporting event and post-game. And I'll never forget the director that night was amazing. And he had that shot of the Heat fans leaving the building and then trying to get back in after the Ray Allen hit the shot. And like, that's the like directors, man, like those guys and gals, like they're the unbelievable all-stars. Like their attention to detail and the foresight that they have to see it before it happens is just incredible. And I'll never forget those moments when we thought, all right, the Spurs are about to win the title. And then Ray Allen hits the shot. The game goes to overtime. The Heat win. The fans are trying to get back in. The series is going to a 7th game. It was just surreal. It was amazing.
Where were you in the building when that happened?
I watched most of the game in the arena, and then when the fourth quarter starts, you kind of go back to the production truck. So like you walk basically through the tunnel, and then like right outside the arena, the truck, like there's the game truck where they're doing the broadcast, and then they're right next to there's the production truck where you're doing the pre and post game. And so I go into the truck, and all of our people are in there, and like after a long playoff run, you're thinking, okay, the Spurs are about to win, and people start packing the bags in their mind.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, okay, guys, let's make sure we're sharp here. I'm like, you never know. The Heat could come back. We could have a miracle finish. And then it happened. Everybody's mad at me because they're all thinking we're going home because the series is over. And then they're blaming me for jinxing it. I'm like, if you're blaming me for being a jinx, this is one of the greatest shots in NBA history. I'm sorry, sorry for something awesome happening, But
go ahead.
That was that was an amazing 10 minutes.
So for you to work on that crew, how do you have to react to that when you think that you're going to have to maybe plan for a post-game show where you're crowning the Spurs as the champion versus, and we see this all the time in sports where things happen at the last second where you have to react, and that's all a part of the business. But now Ray Allen hit this miraculous shot, and you have to completely change course and pivot to now having to plan a post-game show where you prepare for Game 7. How does that transpire?
So it's a lot easier than you think, because you have great people around you who know their roles. Your researcher will start contributing ideas. He'll send you a note right away. Here are the best, but here's a list of great shots in NBA Finals history. And then you forward that to a PA, and they start pulling all those shots, And then you start thinking about, okay, Game 7s. You start thinking about great Game 7s in history, and you have all that stuff ready to go. And then one of the best advice I ever got about producing was from Mike Schiffman, who now is in charge of basketball at ESPN. Like he's in charge of college basketball and NBA, just the entire operation. And so I was working under him about 15 years ago, and when I was just starting to produce shows. And he said, you'll never get stuck if you always ask what's next. And just think, okay, so I have this. Okay, what's next after that? Okay, what's next after that? And you can always answer the question, what's next? And then if you keep asking that, you'll build a great show. So that's whenever I get stuck, that's what I always go back to, what's next.
All right, Tom, last question. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Outside of your SportsCenter personalities, who's your favorite sports personality that you've encountered over your 20 years? And it's got to be a long list, but if you can pick one, two, or three, who's somebody that maybe they come into the studio or you have to talk to them to get them on with Scott, and you're thinking, oh man, I can't wait to talk to this guy or girl again.
Interesting. Man, that's a tough question. I wasn't really prepared for that.
Somebody where you're thinking, oh, I can't wait for so-and-so to come back in and catch up with them, or maybe just have them on the show.
Man, I mean, I always found, like, obviously, like, you want to put, like, there's two types of great guests. There's the great guest that is unpredictable and you never know what they're going to do. So, like, people like from an announcer standpoint, like Walton, or like from an athlete standpoint, like Gronkowski, where when you put them on, you never really know what's going to happen, and that's really exciting. But then there's also like the when you get people in a setting where they can really be thoughtful and introspective about what they've just accomplished. Like I always enjoy, and this isn't specific to one person, but it's specific to an environment. One of a great idea that Stanford Steve and Scott had when we were starting the Van Pelt show was, could we, instead of interviewing people on the field after a game, could we get a room in the arena and get them to come into this room where they were less surrounded by noise so that they could really concentrate on the conversation? And that was a really great idea by them. And we were able to pull that off at a lot of events like the NBA Finals or the college football playoff, events where we were broadcasting it and we could find a room that we could make this environment happen. And inevitably what happens is they come in to this room where there's just a producer from ESPN and the headset and the chair. And it's the first time they've sat down since they've accomplished one of the great things they've accomplished in their life. The first time I really saw this happen was when Clemson beat Alabama and Deshaun Watson came into the room, and he sat down and he just took this huge deep breath. And you could tell that he had just then realized what had actually happened and that they had won and that he had thrown the game-winning touchdown to beat Alabama. And when you have a great interviewer like Scott and a great subject, whether it's Deshaun Watson or Steph Curry or LeBron James, that's when you get magic. And I've seen it happen over and over in that interview environment. That's when we get our best stuff. And those are the things I go back to now when you ask me that question. So I'm sorry I didn't ask it in like,
hey, that's okay,
you're really thinking, but that's kind of how I think about it, is when you get a subject that's just accomplished something great and you have them in a place where they can really think about what it is that they had just accomplished.
Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to talk about everything going on right now. I hope you're doing well, and again, appreciate it.
All the best to you, Paul, and hopefully, with any luck, we'll be hearing you announce Bowie Bay Sox games, hopefully sooner rather than later. I'm really looking forward to hearing that.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Take care, bud.
Hope you all enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Like I said in the beginning, more content coming soon as always. Make sure to subscribe down below. Leave a comment or reach out to me on who you want to see me talk to next. I'd love to know what you all are interested in. Make sure to like this video, and again, stay tuned for more coming soon. Thanks again for watching, everybody.